and enjoy your evening, Cathie Pelletier and Bob Keys.
Thank you, everybody. Welcome to One Longfellow Square. Thank you, Cathie, for coming out.
It's my pleasure.
We appreciate your being here. So we're going to have a wide-ranging conversation tonight about wedding in Maine and about Cathie's career. And I want to start by thanking you for coming down from Allagash and asking you if you saw any moose on your way.
I didn't. I saw one often from my back patio not long ago.
Yes.
Stood across the river and right where the eagle lands.
Yeah. One of the things I want to talk tonight about is the sense of place and the importance of place in your life and in your work. You moved home to Allagash about 8 years ago, a little less than a decade ago, and into the house, I believe, where you grew up.
Yes.
And that's right on the St. John River.
It is.
It's where your family has spent all of its life.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you come home? You spent 30 years in the South and then you came home. Why did you come home?
Well, and also in the eastern townships of Quebec and Toronto, but mostly in the South. I came home because I have a father and a mother. I came home to take care of my mother for 3 months and she died of cancer in 2000. And so my father was left alone, and he was in his late 80s then and starting a new business. And so I came home to try to keep him out of trouble. And I thought that I might get a condo around Bangor or something and come and go. But that is the house I was born in. And I was telling people before, when I get up to go to work each day to sit at my computer, I'm sitting about 8 feet from where I was born. And since that's their bedroom, I'm going to bet I was conceived there too. So it's a bathroom now, or I would put a bed in there and use that as the room I go out in of the house. It was ironic that Mom and I were, lying together in bed as the last night that she died, a terrible snow blizzard, and the lights of the house just vague eyes in the night. And the woman who came to take care of her was a nurse, and she's the reason my mother came to Allagash in the first place. She was a city girl. She grew up down by, in St. John, Maine, which is just above Fort Kent. She was terrified of Allagash, and came out to help this woman who was expecting twins, and met my father. And my father's really good looking. And instead of staying for 2 weeks, she stayed 7 years. So the woman who came to give her morphine that night was one of those twins, and she called her by her mother's name that night. So, yeah, and when I get up and go outside, and I go on my bike now, I'm biking the same road I biked as a kid. Different tire, but, well, maybe not. I don't think so. A lot of potholes in the spring up there. But I look up the field, and my family graveyard is there. My parents are there. It's only half acre, but graveyard's big enough. Graveyards await their patient. They're the only 2 people there. Along the bank, the last dogs I rescued are buried there, and along that same bank are the bones of beloved pets for 60 years. And if I were to go on toward Allagash, I would be driving through my father's childhood, and the St. John, the Allagash River Bridge is there now, but my grandfather Tom ran the ferry for 33 years across that river. And my great-grandparents and grandparents and aunts and uncles are all buried there. If I go the other way toward Fort Kent, I drive through the first settlers of St. Francis, which are my paternal ancestry, the Thibodeaus and the John Groves. And there are cairns there for the first settler, who's my great-great-great-grandfather. If I keep going, I drive through my mother's childhood in St. John. And my grandparents are all buried there, and aunts and uncles. And then I get to Fort Kent, which is the college of I went, Fort Kent. So if I weren't already a novelist, I would need to become one. I mean, that's pretty heavy angst, yeah. So at times it's not easy, but at other times it's comforting.
When I interviewed you in 2013, you had been back 4 years, and at that time you told me that you, quote, didn't consider myself back yet. Are you back now?
I think you should ask my bones that. My bones are tired of moving. I think the cement has hardened. My father's gone. He died at 95 2 years ago. And by the way, my mother used to say he was spoiled. And I moved back home, and after about a year of living with him, every time I walked by the family graveyard where her headstone was, I apologized to her because I used to take up for him. As a spoiled brat. I think because my father built that house with my grandfather Tom, and they dug the foundation with forces, they took 3.5 weeks. My being born there, the only child, where am I going to go now? I mean, where now? I'm 64, I still can't believe it. I was telling Bob earlier, I feel like, you know, you're still looking okay, and then you gaze down into your reflection in your iPad, your screen, your computer screen. Do you ever have that happen? And you're shocked. This person who's glaring up at you. So I think I'm going for good, yeah.
I know that feeling every day.
You don't know it as well as I do.
I'd like you to create context for people who've never been, to explain Allagash for us. What does it smell like? What are the changes seasons like?
Well, it doesn't look like what some of the neighbors have said it does.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we get some bad press now and then. We get a bad ride now and then. Even when I was a kid growing up, if I went to Fort Kent, there was prejudice against people from Allagash. You know, oh my God, those wild hillbillies up there. I think it looks and smells like my childhood, except some of the people I loved are missing, my beloved sister and my parents. But it smells, it sounds like the river. The river is what runs through the heart of that town. Everyone there is connected. You know, there are two rivers, the Allagash River. How many of you have been to Allagash? I can hardly see you, by the way. I could have every enemy in the country sitting there right now. Like I owe everybody money and don't know it. So there's quite a few. Could I see again, please? That's not bad. That's not bad. There's a river, the Allagash River runs 90 miles north and hits the St. John. And I live right at the St. John. And if any of you are Facebook friends, you know that I put a lot of pictures up of my house and the land and nature, because I'm a nature nut. The St. John that runs behind my house forms the natural border between the two countries, 4 miles from my house, 4 or 5 miles from my house. So it sounds like the northern raven, which I missed in the south. And my Tennessee dogs were terrified of that bird until they got used to it, hearing it. And it smelled, listen, it sounds like seagulls now. That's the biggest surprise I had moving back. When I was a kid, if a seagull flew up our river, I would yell, or someone would yell, "There goes a big white bird," right? And everybody would drop what they were doing and run to get a look at this bird, which is like this biblical dove or something. And we just never saw one. And I have a character, I think in my second novel, who says it was coming to Allagash to let us know there really was an ocean out there somewhere. But I think it might have come down from the St. John, the St. Lawrence Seaway. But now, I can wake up in the morning, there's this noise out on the lawn, and I love all animals, so it's not a bad noise, but when there's 30 of them, when it rains, and you know, you understand what I'm saying down here. Shocking. With the turkey vulture followed me from the south north, but it's strange to see seagulls. It seems like an ocean thing, you know, just the sound of it makes me think I'm on the ocean somewhere, and so I wake up and think, where am I?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Global warming, perhaps. It's fair to say, I believe, that you were a bit of an academic prodigy. I believe you started college when you were 16, if that's correct. Is that right?
I did. I think it would be very unfair to really intelligent people to say that.
Anyway, you started young.
I started young. I skipped 2 years of school. I really think that first grade, skipping me the first grade, turned me into a novelist. There was an adult in my mind. But prodigy, I wasn't the John Stuart Mill of Allagash, I can tell you that. Probably everybody you've had in the show is smarter. But I certainly stood out in a small town.
Okay.
And I skipped. Can I tell you the story about how that happened? Because it changed my life, and I'd love to know what would have happened if it hadn't, because I really don't think I'd have become a novelist. But one day in my front yard, this car pulled in, and this little man with amazingly overreaching eyebrows, lots of dandruff on his head, and he asked me where the school was. And I mean, it's Allagash, it's one road, right? I couldn't have been too much of a genius. And he started a conversation with me, and then he went on, and I never thought of it again. And then he started coming into my 5th grade. And I had just started the 6th grade. We had just gotten past potato harvest. So I had just started the 6th grade, and he, yes, and he would come into the class, and when he did, my teacher would call on me, even if I had just read. And I thought, well, she's using me to show off in front of the new superintendent, because that's who he was. He's from somewhere downstate. That's below Caribou. And finally, they came and talked to my parents and said, the superintendent wants to skip her. Well, let me tell you something. You don't do that in a small town. You just don't. Man, I still can't talk about it. So anyway, they skipped me, and nobody asked me how I was doing ever. They haven't to this day. You know, I mean, nowadays, at least I could watch Oprah, right? Or something like that. No one spoke to me about it, and I got an F in English. I'd forget I had homework. I would watch the kids playing softball because I was a tomboy, and I would forget that I had homework, and then I got an F, and I said to the teacher, do I have to take English again because I just can't get it? And she said, well, you're going to have to take it every year. And she saw something in me. And by the way, this was about the time I was allowed to play in the high school team because they didn't have enough players. I was like 11. And some genius, now this is the real prodigy at Allagash, some genius decided that we were going to have a basketball team. They'd already started it. So they decided that, that our letters, basketball letters, needed to be blood boiling red. So I wore that big scarlet A on the back of my coat. Until we read the scarlet letter, and I said, "The teacher, this is going to go off." It was like that big, and it was bright, bright blood red. So I had a very tough time, and then by the 8th grade, I mean, I went from basically from the 5th grade to the 7th. That's social. I never knew, I couldn't find the square root of a number because you learned it in the 6th grade. I only know that 144 is 12. I just memorized that. And the girls were wearing makeup and bras and straight skirts and and then some of the mothers came and started complaining to the principal, why is she being skipped and my kid isn't? So it pulled the social rug out from under me in Allagash for a long time. So by the time I skipped the 2nd year, people didn't get extra credits back then. I went down to that junior program they had for juniors in high school where you could go spend the summer in college, 3 weeks. And the professors there said, you know, maybe you should go to college. By that time, I was damaged. I couldn't wait to get out of Dodge. I really couldn't. So they wrote letters and they accepted me at Fort Kent. Now, I was 16. When I turned 17, they expelled me.
That's what I want to hear. So you left college at 17 and I understand.
Well, I was asked to leave.
You were asked to leave.
My mother likes your version better than that. She's still alive.
And you hitchhiked around the country?
I didn't right then. I went to Connecticut and lay on a friend's sofa for a long, long time and memorized complete acts from Shakespeare because I thought, you're still worth something. You know, your life isn't over. And this is what I tell students when I do teach today. No matter what happens to you, I don't care what age you are. Your life isn't over. So I started wearing my brother's army jacket that said Pelletier. I have no idea what that meant, but it seemed rebellious. They kicked me out for radicalism, which is hilarious. It was really pranksterism. You know, it sounds like Angela Davis. I'm kind of proud of it now. But, you know, pulling a fire alarm when everybody knows about it, which they did. And I was 16, and I wanted to be the one that the 18-year-old said, you go ahead and pull it. Yeah, and then staying out past my curfew, which I never had when I was home. So after a while, and you know, I never thought I'd get the job while I was learning Shakespeare, by the way, but when I turned 18, and I thought I was 17 until about 3 weeks ago when I found my little scrapbook. I was actually 18 when I hitchhiked.
Where'd you go?
I went through 43 states. I never hitchhiked before, and I think we dipped into Mexico a little bit and back. No one cared then. No wall. And God, what an experience, but just to be alive. I had hair down to here, and I had a granny dress and like granny glasses, and man.
It was 1969?
It was 1971. Yeah. And a girl I met in Connecticut came with me. And I'm in touch with a police officer in Houston right now because I think I came in touch with some murderers. And he handled the case. Remember the Dean Coral murders with all the boys he had buried in his yard? That's another story. We need a whole show for that. But I found the scrapbook that I made of my trip just about 3 weeks ago. And there were these postcards I sent home to my parents. Now imagine, no cell phones. You could hardly, you know, calling home collect was expensive then, and truck drivers picked us up just to get us to be safe. So we were lucky that the good ones picked us up. And in the postcards, that's how I knew it was 1971. In the postcards, and it's so flippant, those postcards are so flippant, and here are my parents back in Maine, and I had just turned 18, and they want to kill me, but they can't find me, right? So I called and said, Daddy, I'm in Poplar Bluff, and he said, where is that? I thought you were in Connecticut with your sister, and I said, no, I'm in Missouri. So that started it. But one of those postcards says, I realize by now you've heard from the police. I'm going to put it on Facebook. And I thought, oh my God, what? And then I remembered, when we got to Portland, Oregon, we checked into a YWMC. And I have to always do the letters in my head, YWM, okay, YWMC. And to prove that we weren't runaways, I had to give them my parents' phone number. So that's why the police, they called my parents.
They let you go, or you went on your own?
Oh yeah, they didn't know where I was half the time. No. They had 5 children, and they had me 6 years later. So I was really like an only child in many ways. And if my mother said, you know, where are you going, I probably would say, well, you're a cop now? Suddenly you're a cop? Yeah, you wouldn't want me. You wouldn't want me. Hardly prodigy, more like brat.
Yeah. How much do you think that experience influenced your decision to write? Did you feel like you had a lot to say after you had seen so much of the country?
I had been writing, I had a suitcase full of stuff by then. By the time I started college, I had a suitcase full of manuscripts. I started writing when I was about 10. I still remember the day, it's astonishing. But the snow started to fall, and it was the old radiators with the mittens sizzling on them, and remember just the smell of that, you can smell it. And I was at the back of the room watching the snow and knowing that the bus was going to come soon. One of those gray, wintry days, and all of a sudden I thought, I want to write this down. I think I was 9 years old. And I thought, I want to write this down. And this feeling came over me that maybe it's what people feel when they say they're washed in the blood or they feel the baptism. It felt like this electricity, like everything was alive. And so I wrote this poem about snow. And thus began the Odyssey.
So you've now written a dozen novels or so, a book of poetry. You've written songs, a grade school novel, or a middle grade novel.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about songs again in a few minutes.
I love that little middle grade novel, by the way.
That was
Somebody asked me what the difference is, and I said, you just don't use the F word.
And 2 of your books have been turned into movies.
Yes.
What was that experience like? Was that glamorous?
Well, it might have been, but I didn't really go. For one thing, they really, I mean, and someone like Richard Russo could talk to this a little bit more. These were under my pseudonym, Casey McKinnon. My grandmother's name is McKinnon. And, they really, if they can have it so that the writer isn't on the set, it would be really nice. I didn't write the teleplays, because they were TV films. And I suppose I could have gone if I had wanted to, but what I did get invited to was the premiere for both of them. And my agent at the time was at CAA, Creative Artists Agency, and he said, okay, we've got to get first class tickets here. We got to have all kinds of accommodations. We got to have the car. We got to blah. And I said, well, I'm probably not going to go. And he said, doesn't matter. We're going to get it in the contract. Get it in this contract. It's going to be for every other contract from now on. It's going to be in it. So I don't remember what I did. I know what I did for the Jacqueline Bisset, Valerie Harper, is that my mother had died not long before that. And she loved that book, and honest to God, if you knew the book, I have no idea why my mother would like it. I mean, it's really kind of a little risque. And for the Alicia Silverstone one, I was in the eastern townships of Quebec, and I was cutting up buckets of apples and carrots for the deer who went through there. And I've stopped feeding the deer, but this was on their trail, and I was 1,000 feet back in the woods. So I had on an old hat and an old flannel shirt and my big old punky boots, and my husband said, I should just take a picture of you right now. You could be in Los Angeles right now. So I lifted my boot like that, and he took a picture. So I had 2 pictures of me the night of my premiere. The old brown felt hat. And so at least that would have been, 10 years earlier, I'd have gone in a heartbeat. I'd have gone. There's just something about it when you get older that you think, oh, I think I'll stay home. There's something on TV. Maybe Alicia Silverstone's on TV. I'll stay home.
Why did you write those books under a pseudonym?
Well, I wanted to make money, for one thing. And I wasn't sure how they would go over. And I thought, what if people start saying, who was the idiot who wrote this book? I should have some kind of a plan B, And then if it does well, maybe it will bring those readers to my other books. And it was really my husband who prompted me by telling me to quit saying stuff about commercial novels in bookstores or shut up. And he wasn't coming in with me anymore. And then he said, look, see, Oprah had her club then. And we used to go in, and all of Oprah's books would be at the front of the bookstore. This was on the Water Street in Toronto, where I met him on a book tour. I was at the Harbourfront Festival. And I would just start in on, this isn't right, this isn't right. And he was getting tired of that. And then I would move my friends out and put them in Oprah's club at airports and different places. I thought Oprah can't be everywhere, and she probably would like my suggestions. So he said, look, why don't you write your own? If you're going to go, you're going to be like, so I thought, I wonder if I can. So I wrote Harvest Moon. I shouldn't even tell you this. But I wrote Harvest Moon in 3.5 weeks. And I wrote Candles on Bay Street in just under a month. And then, of course, I rewrote. But that's, it's about a 50,000 word book. So that I wrote all day long. And I can't do that with another novel because it takes too much emotion. But I was really separated from these characters because I was trying to make money. And then I did the rewrite and cried and got all emotionally involved with them and apologized to them.
Did you make money?
I did.
Good.
I did. I did, yes, thank you. Uncle Sam's applauding too, wherever he is. I'd like to do that again. But it's interesting how people change because a lot of the critics went after me. And friends of mine said, what is wrong with making money? I spent 12 years as a poet and made $60. I got paid a lot of copies. You can't take copies to the bank. What was wrong with that? One critic, I think it was a Chicago Tribune, I'm not sure, said, it's as if Jane Austen started writing trash. Jane Austen? You never called me Jane Austen before. Why do that now, to take a shot at me? So I said to my editor, why don't we do the ellipsis thing? And why don't we put, it's as if Jane, on the back of the paperback, it's as if Jane Austen started writing, ... She wouldn't let me.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
So what are you working on now?
Well, I've taken on a big book that is coming next, a big Vietnam memoir, set in 1968 and 1969, the body count years of the war. And something that's very unusual is I'm co-writing a book with a string theory physicist. Who'd have thunk that, huh? I call us Professor Higgins and Eliza Doolittle. But I came up with an idea for a book. I had been looking through some Einstein interviews a friend of mine had done, and we're still doing that, by the way. A lot of his colleagues she had interviewed. And I stumbled upon, should I talk about this, what the book is? I stumbled upon, and I bet a lot of you know about this, in 1919 there was a total solar eclipse, and the path of totality swept across northern South America, and a little island off the coast of across Africa, but also a little island off the west coast of Africa called Principe. And Arthur Eddington was a British astronomer, mathematician, and physicist who had received an early draft of a guy named Albert Einstein's theory of general relativity. It had snuck across the English Channel because they were not communicating with Germany. And a Swedish physicist had sent Eddington this paper. And he was infatuated. One thing, he was one of the physicists of the day who knew enough mathematics that he could understand the general theory, which I haven't a clue what this is, by the way, not a clue. I read this stuff and I write it, I memorize it, and then I say to Gates, is this true? Is this right? My co-author. So they realized the only way they could really prove that light deflected twice, well at that time it wasn't even twice, until he did his 1915 physics. Twice what Newton predicted. If it did, it was going to topple physics because Newton was the god for 200 years in classical physics. And so the only way to really see how much light would deflect would be to photograph the stars during the day, and of course you can't do that. It would have to be during a total solar eclipse. And the one that was coming in 1919, if hopefully the war was over, and Eddington was a Quaker, wouldn't fight in the war, that caused a problem, financing always caused a problem, was that particular eclipse, the path of totality across that. So they organized 2 British expeditions, and it took 2 years, and the war ended just as and by the way, the Spanish flu was raging at the same time. So there was a particularly interesting cluster of stars, and then, is it Pleiades or Pleiades? How do you pronounce it?
Pleiades.
Pleiades? Go online, there's about 4 different pronunciations, and every one looks believable. I used to have an old astronomy book, and it was Hyades in that one, but so that's what they did. They photographed the stars, and they proved Albert Einstein's theory of general relativity theory, and overnight Einstein was a rock star. So I thought, why hasn't anybody written about that? And I'll tell you why, because the scientists have written about it. Scientists are brilliant and they're inquisitive, they aren't nosy like novelists are, right? I thought, my God, how did they do this? And to go as far as they went, and back then, I want to know more about that. You know, does what happened in Principe stay in Principe? I don't know. These guys are gone from home a long time, who knows what might have happened. So I started finding stuff, and then I thought, oh, I need a co-author. So you want to know how I found my co-author?
I do.
I was lying on the sofa, not memorizing Shakespeare, but thinking, I'm going to find a co-author. And TurboTax commercial came on. You don't need to be a genius to do your taxes? I thought, well, maybe not, but you need one to write this book with me. And sure enough, Sir S. James Gates Jr., we called in Brainiac S.J., and he says, Horace, whatever his name is, you got a finger? Put your finger there. Yay, you did it. Have any of you seen that? So I thought, I'm going to call that guy. And I emailed, I found him at the University of Maryland. Oh my God, he's a Medal of Science recipient under the Obama administration. He's brilliant. He's got so many YouTube clips. He's in, I don't know where he is right now, I think China. But I sent an email, and the secretary called the next morning and said, Dr. Gates would like to talk to you. And we've become great pals. I just adore that man. He's so easygoing and easy to work with and understanding and patient, and would you have thought that? You know? Thank God I didn't call somebody else.
Did you send him a copy and ask him for accuracy?
Yeah. And I'm surrounded by those. By the way, when he said he would do it, I was so intimidated. I thought, what was I thinking? What was I thinking? I can't do this. I'm a novelist. And I spent 9 months writing a 145-page proposal.
Wow.
And just to prove, I realize now I probably didn't have to do that, but I thought no one's going to let a novelist write a book with a physicist. And so my agent sold it. It is coming out, and it's very daunting. It's not an easy book. But the Vietnam book is going to be even more daunting because it's more personal, you know, and it's... Sorry, I've rattled on.
No, that's fine. Well, I want to ask you about Vietnam. Actually, that's a really good transition. For a couple of reasons, Vietnam has been on my mind. One is because of the Ken Burns, the Novak movie that's on PBS. And as I was preparing for this interview, I'm watching the documentary, and I'm reminded of a character in one of your books, The One-Way Bridge, Harry Plunkett. He's a Vietnam veteran. He's a local mechanic in town. He's having flashbacks. And when I read that book originally, I wondered why you created that character the way you did. And as I was watching the documentary last week, that thought came back to my head. Tell me about Harry Plunkett and why you created him, and why was it important for you to put somebody with that Vietnam background in that book?
It was a slow process. For one thing, I was lying in Nashville, Tennessee in 1991, and remember when all we had to watch was CNN News? What's her name? Linda Ellerbee. Over and over and over again. Every half hour they ran it again, they'd watch it over again. I couldn't sleep much at night, so I was always, and all of a sudden this clip comes on of a snow-laden landscape, and there's this bridge going up like tinfoil with the ice piled up against it, taking it out, and I'm thinking, what? And beneath it said St. John River Bridge and the date, and beneath that it said clip by news hound Louis Pelletier III, my nephew. Because I had just been thinking, what idiot got that close to that bridge? And then after I found out everybody was okay, that was the big flood they had in '91, no one died, but I thought, I was born and raised in a little town. My ancestors founded the town, 6 generations there, now there are 8 generations. And I've never put a one-way bridge in my fiction. What a metaphor for life, a one-way bridge at the end of the road. Not many choices, right? And so I, the next day, wrote down a whole bunch of stuff. There's going to be, I'm obsessed with mailmen, by the way. I'm obsessed with mailboxes and mailmen because I was a kid who grew up in the 50s and 60s. And you send off a roll of film and you'd wait like a week and here comes the mail car's nose pointing around the turn. You go, oh my God, maybe my film came. maybe the pen pal wrote me a letter. We were so connected to the outside world, to the mailbox. And I just love mailboxes to this day. And so I have a mailman in usually most of my novels, and he's usually nosy. He tries to read through the envelopes, and he lingers to talk to his customers to kind of find out what's in a certain interesting looking envelope. And so I thought, okay, I've got my mailman. Now I've got to have somebody who really annoys him because he loves his mail rule book. He's crazy about it. He knows it. So you got to break rules, right, to cause conflict. And so this guy, Harry Plunkett, suddenly appeared, and I didn't have any intention of him being a veteran. This book took me 12 years to write, so it had a boiling, simmering process. Shortly into the book, Harry tells me that he's a Vietnam veteran. And I thought, oh, wow, that's interesting. Those characters will tell you things. They'll tell you. My mother tried to get me not to use the F word. And I'd say, Mother, I'm not using it. My characters are using it. She said to me one day, well, they can't do it without you, Ken. I said, I think they can. That's the interesting thing. But so I thought, I said, Harry, you can be a vet, but you keep your mouth shut about Vietnam because I've never been to war. My wars take place, I think I say here, around the kitchen table in the bedroom. They're fought over Christmas lights and sales on purses and brawls in a bar. I don't know anything about Vietnam, and I would never want to dishonor anybody by thinking I could write about war. So Harry had a flashback one day, and I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? I liked him too much to kill him off, and I was too deep into the book. And I just knew that I had to take it on, so I did, and I spent another 2 years reading and writing about Vietnam and the flora and fauna, and I knew that it had to be me. It had to be my experiences, not stuff I had read other soldiers had said, but I read that stuff anyway. And then I thought, well, look, the guys from Allagash who went to Vietnam, and there were quite a few of them, they didn't know anything about the Jungle or war until they got there, so I'm just going to pretend that happened to me. And I really tried to pay close attention. For instance, I emailed a group of birders in Vietnam and said, hello, I'm a writer and I'm in this forest in Quebec, and I'm wondering if the crow pheasant in Vietnam is only in the Central Highlands, or would it be okay if I put it in the Mekong Delta? And they never wrote back to me. I thought some nut in Canada. Because I wanted to be that accurate because I loved the bird. I loved reading about it, and I put him in the Mekong Delta. And then I wanted to read about the canopy and what Agent Orange did. And then how has Vietnam bounced back? How has nature said, I still want to live. I care enough to live that I'm going to come back from this. And by that time I had to go with it. And I sent it to a couple of medics who would agree to read. And one medic said to me, and they thought I'd passed the test. And one medic said to me, there's no one way to write about that war. For every one of us, it was different. And that meant a lot to me because it meant that maybe my version of what I imagined it would be, when you look up at the moon, wouldn't you wonder, that moon is shining over Allagash, Maine right now. I mean, it will be. That's the same moon my family's looking at that back in Allagash. You hear the noises in the jungle. There's a lizard, by the way, who used to swear. I loved it when I found out that. The medic told me that. It's the FU lizard. It sounds like that. Google it. So it's an interesting journey.
Would you mind reading the opening?
Oh my, this is One Way Bridge?
Yeah.
You know, writers hate to open their books because when they see, oh my God, I can't believe that's a repetition, you can't change it. It's true, ask them. I hate to open one. This is the beginning of One Way Bridge. There is something in the northern Maine air that speaks of the first snowfall hours before it arrives. This is the same knowledge that birds find in those minutes before a rainstorm, or the tremor that rabbits feel in their paws before a quake. Snow has a way of talking if you know how to listen. Billy Thunder, who was from downstate and therefore an outsider, heard it first that autumn. If this air had teeth, it would bite, Billy said, as if maybe he were talking to some of the guys at Burt's Lounge in Watertown. But he was standing alone at the upper end of the long and narrow Allagash Bridge, waiting by his mailbox for Orville Craft to arrive with that day's mail. Billy was expecting a shipment from Portland that would say, do not open until Christmas, on the outer brown wrapper. But he intended to open it immediately, maybe even smoke some of it. A wind rose up from the river, caught the invisible current between the bridge's columns, and then swept out from under the ends, a wind ripe with winter. Billy zipped up his jacket, then reached into a pocket for his cigarettes. Being a native of distant Portland gave him the courage to say out loud what everyone else in town feels in their bones, but rarely speaks. Get ready for a long stretch of ice-cold white. This is the last music. I shouldn't have had that on the cover. It really hurt my book, and my agent said, do you want to fight to get it off? And I really, people don't understand that when you sell a book, it's a year and a half sometimes before the book comes out, so you're deep into another project. That's why if I have somebody in town, in Allagash, win the lottery, and a week before my book comes out, someone wins the lottery, they think I put that in the book, right? But in fact, you wrote it a year and a half before, so you're always saying, oh, don't let anyone commit suicide or shoot somebody or steal something. So by the time it came up, there were people who fought to get it off. And the publisher wanted it, she loved it and wanted it, and I was into another book, I didn't want to fight. So I got a moose on my cover.
Well, we've talked a lot tonight about your time in Maine, but you have spent much of your life in Nashville. You moved to Nashville and spent about 30 years there.
Yep.
Right? And you wrote some songs. You became a songwriter, and based on some of the things you told me today, you're still writing songs.
Yeah.
I won't ask you to sing, but your song has had some success. You've had songs recorded by a lot of people. Talk about your songwriting, how songwriting has influenced how Nashville influenced you.
Nashville. Well, I don't consider myself a songwriter. Yeah, let's let it go. I don't consider myself a songwriter because I have friends who are songwriters, and then, you know, Bob McDill, who was probably Nashville's most successful songwriter, he had #1 songs in 4 decades, said to me one time, a little interview I did with him, people come to Nashville and they socialize themselves into situations with other songwriters, and then they get a co-written song, and they're successful songwriters when they haven't written a song by themselves. And I think to be a songwriter, you need to be a troubadour in a sense. You need to sing some stuff out of your heart the way he did. And I mean, if a songwriter co-wrote a novel with 3 other novelists, would he consider himself a novelist? It would be. So I never did consider myself a songwriter, even though we've had some success. No big hit, and God, it just keeps trying to hit this song. Tim McGraw is singing it on YouTube now. And you think, please cut it. Don't just sing it on YouTube. Go into a studio and cut it. So, and I traveled the world. I lived with a singer. How many of you remember Gary Puckett and Union Gap? The woman? I lived with the man who wrote that for 17. I lived with him for 17 years. He didn't write it for 17 years, but. So I got to travel the world. It was like being a Fulbright scholar from Nashville, you know, country music Fulbright scholar. Sometimes there would be a rented, a chartered Delta 767 just full of stars from Nashville and their bands and their family members, and it's like a flying bar, really. But it was a tremendous education for a young writer, for an aspiring writer. It was just a tremendous education. And then I made some great friends. I went to school in songwriting. I mean, I studied writing at the University of Maine at Fort Kent with a very good professor, but I went to school in songwriting. That's a hard job. I'd be doing it if I could do that on my own. And there's an immediacy there, you know, that you don't get with the novel. I've compared the genres. The poem is a chihuahua, the short story is a cocker spaniel, and the novel is usually, unless it's like the skinny, painful ones, usually it's like a Newfoundland dog or something, you know, a big one. And I needed a bigger canvas to write a novel than a song allowed, even though my origins were years in poetry. I needed a bigger canvas, and so I learned a lot from those men and women who write songs in Nashville. They're extraordinary. Bob McDill says we spend 6 months making it look easy.
You spent a long time there. It must have been hard to leave, even though you were coming home.
Well, it changed. It just exploded. You know, it grew so big. It used to be a big town, and you fly into V&A, the airport there. And like when I was living with Jim Glazer, the man who wrote the song, his brother, by the way, had "Put Another Log on the Fire." Remember that? Shel Silverstein song. He was one of the Outlaws with Waylon Willie, Jesse, and Tom Hall. You'd fly into Nashville, and the cab driver would say, "Jim, it's Tommy Jones. You remember me? I used to play guitar with Ernest Tubb. And hell, we spent a lot of time on the road. I remember you guys. And Jim would say, well, Tommy, I haven't seen you in ages, you know? And now, my last driver, when I went into Nashville, he was waiting to take me 70 miles, so he was dressed in a purple robe and yellow and purple hat. And I said, where are you from? He said, I am from Cameroon. So we had quite a talk. He'd never seen snow before until he came to Nashville. But in other words, you got 840 circling the city now, and it's just exploded. And then it's turned corporate. You know, it used to be that creativity was alive and on the streets in Nashville, and you go into any bar, and I could call Mr. Bell out at the Grand Ole Opry and say, Mr. Bell, it's Cathie, Jim Glazer's girlfriend. Can I bring some friends out there tonight? And he'd say, Cathie, come on out here. Hell yeah, girl, bring them out. And you go backstage where the stars are in the dressing rooms. Now, even for a member of the Opry to take someone backstage, it's like 3 or 4 months of red tape before they can do something like that. I mean, a few of them still can, but I certainly couldn't. But it was very open, and then it turned corporate, you know. Have any of you ever been to the Opryland Hotel? Isn't that something like another planet? When I first moved to Nashville, they had just started building it, and they're still building it. They have a river running through it now. It's enormous. And most people who come for conventions and think, oh my gosh, there's people over here. Those are the ones I really owe the money to, right? When they come sometimes for conventions, they never leave that hotel because, you know, they've got a river. Why would they? You know, all kinds of entertainment, you know, from jazz to and I don't know how many restaurants. So sadly, and the new Opry is out there now next to that, whereas the old one was down in 4th and Broad. And could I tell them the Sonny Curtis song?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if you have time or not.
Of course you do.
One of the songwriters that influenced my book, Beaming Sonny Home, was a man named Sonny Curtis. And Sonny was from Meadow, Texas. His friend was Buddy Holly. And Sonny was one of the Crickets. I think after Buddy died, though. But he just told me recently, hell, I'd like to move back to Meadow, Texas, but Louise don't want to go, and I like living with Louise. So Sonny, we were all at dinner. A few of us were at dinner at night at a friend's house, and Sonny, I said, Sonny, is that a nickname? I hadn't met him before. And he said, no, it's on my birth certificate, it's just Son Curtis. And I said, why? And he said, well, my parents never did name me. And I said, why? And he said, well, they were really poor. And I said, they were too poor to give you a name? Maybe they were, you know, trying to feed the baby rather than name it, but apparently it was a really bad situation. So that stayed on his birth certificate, and he became known as Sonny. And Louise said, sometimes at night I'll get up and Sonny's sitting in a chair and he's got a beer, and he says, Louise, what about Herald? Herald would have been a good name. My heart broke, and I was working on a novel called Beaming Henry Home. And when Sonny told me that, I said, Sonny, as a matter of fact, I think I mentioned him in the acknowledgments. I said, I'm going to change my title. And is it okay if I say what Louise just told me? And he said, oh, hell yeah. It's okay. Now, very quickly, Sonny was out in Los Angeles one day, and he got a notice from a friend that they were cutting a new sitcom, producing a new sitcom, and they needed a theme song. So the friend gave Sonny a 4-page description of the show. And Sonny sat down, and in 2 hours, he'd written a song, but he didn't even have a tape recorder. So he said, where do I take this? And the friend told him to go over to, it might have been CBS Studios or something. And he went over, and the producer was James L. Brooks. And Sonny sat down with his guitar and sang it. And the producer said, I like that, sing it again. And Sonny sang it again, and the producer said, I'm going to go get the tape recorder. Now here's how it starts. Who can turn the world on? You hear it back again as a commercial. It's back again as a car commercial, I think. So Sonny did okay for himself, for a poor kid from Texas with no name. You know? Yeah, and he wrote, I fought the law. We should all go to the bar, really.
I'm interested in your Nashville connections. I believe you're working on a book with Mickey Raphael. Is that right?
We are. It's kind
Mickey
of on the
is
show.
really Nelson's harmonica player, by the way.
Oh, he's brilliant. Mickey was in Dallas when Kennedy was shot. So I said to him, why don't we do a book of everybody in Dallas when Kennedy was shot? If I had sent it to the right agent, I worked a long time on that proposal, and it's wonderful. I'm friends now with the guy who drove Lee Harvey Oswald into Texas Book Depository. He called, I hope he's still alive, I haven't talked to him for a couple of years. He called, there was a message on my machine one day in Allagash. He said, Miss Cathie, it's Buell Frazier out in Clarksdale, Texas, and I'm seeing y'all getting a lot of snow up there, and just wondering how you are. And I say to my husband, that's the guy who said, what's in the package, Lee? And he said, curtain rods. Remember that? Oh my God, I just love these little tidbits of history. I talked to the stewardess who taught Kennedy to say, I am a Berliner. She knew German, so on the plane she taught him to...
How do you meet all these people?
Hey, internet, Google, you can find people now, right? Instead of looking for, going to a library, looking and looking. So it was fun to interview all of them and talk to them and get to know a few of them. And I found cops riding on a motorcycle and pictures of by the car. And I found one of his bodyguards and people standing at the rotunda. You know who was standing in the rotunda, by the way? And Tony Buxton is here tonight, so he knows this. Oh gosh, help me, Severin's last name is Beliveau? Severin was in the rotunda when Kennedy was, Kennedy's body was reposing there. Amazing, huh?
We've had a, I'll keep it on the south for just a few minutes. We've had a lot of conversations in the last few months about memorials coming down and
Oh my
Civil War
gosh.
monuments. You have a lot of perspective. A lot of your life is down there. I'm curious how you see these events transpiring and what your reactions are.
Oh, I don't think I'm going to take that gauntlet up other than we'll definitely have to go to a bar for that. I can tell you one story about one monument that I have a personal relationship with. Okay, some of you may have seen Stephen Colbert and other comedians and other things in the news about this one monument that's so ugly that it bears notice. I used to have to drive by it almost every day. It went up in the 1998, I think, so it was a new idea, by a sculptor from Maryland whose last name was Kershaw. And he asked his friend who owned land by the interstate if he could put a monument, a sculpture, to Nathan Bedford Forrest there. And as you know, he was the founder of the Klan. And the friend said, sure. So this sculpture went up, and it's the ugliest thing you ever. Nathan Bedford Forrest would be the first one to ask it to come down. Okay, it's the ugliest thing. And so in the Tennessean, a journalist wrote a very, very funny thing about it one day. He said that Forrest looked like he was being goosed. So I thought, I got to know that man. So I invited him to the house and about 30 other people. We had this big discussion. We had so much fun. And after everybody sort of left, you know, the last people, the stragglers who sit around the table, patio, they're usually the ones who have the most to drink. I said, guys, that statue's got to come down. It's too ugly. And so they said, sure. So we actually set some plans in action. I contacted a couple chemists and said, what do I have to put around the horse's feet that will eat away at it? Here's what it's made of. And because it's rearing back on horseback, and Forrest looks like he's hanging on for dear life. You can please Google it. You'll see how ugly it is. So we even talked about our clothing. We go up a few times and stand by the fence and stare at it and, you know, kind of scout the place out. It wasn't an easy place to get into because everybody wanted to kill this statue. I'd even written a poem, and I tried to find it the other day, and I can't. It was a poem about how don't blame other groups for this. I didn't want anybody to get blamed for that if we actually did it. We were going to send this immediately to all the newspapers and radio stations saying it came down because of it's ugly. Not because anybody's black and doesn't want it there. Don't blame anybody. And we were going to remain anonymous. Of course, we'll probably all be in jail right now.
Probably.
And then my mother's cancer came back, and I sort of forgot about Nathan Bedford Forrest. But others haven't. Now they Photoshop it, they put dresses on it, like pink dresses on him and stuff like that. So maybe that's better to leave him up and let people have fun with it. That's a pretty ugly statue.
Interesting history. I'm curious if writing is different for you now at this stage of your life. Now that you've come home, have you changed how you write? Have you changed any of your approach to how you look at the world? Or?
I said once at a conference after other writers had their answers, and they were all very profound, and I was impressed with them. What do you do if you have writer's block or something, or you need inspiration? What keeps you writing? And when it was my turn, I said, I tell myself that if I write for 2 hours, I can play 15 minutes of computer games. And the audience applauded because they were really wanting to hear something, you know, with some humanity in it. I think age changes you too. You know, I tell myself, I'm 64 years old, how many times am I going to get back on that roller coaster? Because that's a 2-year-long roller coaster ride usually. And then I've heard people in my lifetime say, oh, he writes the same novel over and over again, or she writes this. I have no idea what that means, but I don't want to do that. So I keep writing different things. I've had my characters, you know, I've taken one male character through a year. I've taken one female through a year. I'm a kind of Robert Altman writer. If you give me 20 characters in 3 days, I can write a novel. So I tested myself in the other ways to make myself do that. So now I think I'm interested in nonfiction. I've got these 2 big nonfiction books. I have another Allagash book. I've got about 60 pages. I'd like to write that before I die. Well, for one thing, when I wrote the synopsis of what I thought it might be, and often you don't do that, you just don't even, most of the time I don't know what's going to happen until the character's telling me, almost like as the reader does. But in this one, it was about 5 years ago, I started putting down some heavy thought, maybe 6 years, and it's what Facebook can do to a small town, right? Well, I had no idea how prophetic I was, because I've got characters now that are in there that are happening in reality in my town, and that's a bad thing about being back and being on Facebook. In Nashville, I dared to write, you know, because I felt it was important to look back, but not to look around. And now I'm right in the thick of it. I'm a hermit. I don't see many people in town, or even my family most of the time. But it's changed me in that there's a couple nonfiction books I want to write. But in this Allagash book, that will be the last one, they have their the country's first Facebook intervention.
Just in time.
Yeah, and I hope nobody else writes it down before I can get it on paper, but what's her name is, these women come into her living room and her daughter says, Mama, we're here today because we love you. We're not here to judge you. But you need to get the hell off Facebook. Just then she hears a ping that means somebody would like in her post. It was like this. And the daughter says, look at her. She looks just like one of them poor dogs that Russian was, one of those poor dogs that Russian was, oh, something. So, hopefully I'll get that written one day, but well, it's a hard job.
You're 60 pages into that.
Mostly notes.
Yeah.
Mostly notes. Oh, I'll tell you one thing I've got in that I'd like to tackle is Thoreau's Penobscot guide was Joe Polis. Polis, P-O-L-I-S. Not sure how that's pronounced yet. But so I've read some stuff about them. They're pretty interesting stuff. It's some pretty funny stuff. And so I have to have somebody from out of town come to Allagash so I can make fun of the city slickers, right? And have him be horrified at the locals. So he comes to write his thesis on Joe Polis and Thoreau, and he stays in he's going to stay in his grandfather's cabin up on the mountain because he wants to get inside Henry David's head. Then he finds out there's no Wi-Fi up on the mountain. So I'm going to have a lot of fun with those characters. There was something about songwriting I meant to mention, but now I can't remember it. But
Well, maybe your memory will be jogged. We're going to open up to some questions. Molly has a microphone. If you have a question, she'll let you speak into the mic, but try not to grab it.
I'll grab it.
All right. Who
Make
has
it your
the first
own.
questions? Always takes one to break the ice.
I know what I was going to tell you about being a hermit.
Oh.
I told the publisher.
Cathie,
Oh,
congratulations. Dorothy Gardner, Allagash, Maine.
oh my God.
I was secretary for Garfield
Of
King.
course you were.
Sad 10 when you were a student in that school.
You might as well tell them that I spent a lot of time in his office.
Well,
And
we didn't talk about student activity outside.
people would call. Sometimes I would sit at his desk when Mrs. Gardner had left the room. I would sit at his desk, and if the phone rang, I would tell people he had died. I'm so sorry to tell you, but our principal has passed. Oh man, boy. And he was a character, wasn't he? Wasn't he?
His son was principal at Mount Ararat High School in Topsh's, Maine, at 75.
Yes, that's Craig.
Craig King.
I'm in touch with Craig.
I'm on the school board.
say to us, I kept order in the Marines, I'll keep order here. And we all go. He was a good guy. It was nice to see you again, Dorothy. Very nice to see you.
Do we have other questions? Somebody must have some questions.
I was going to tell you the publisher had, he may even be here, had asked me to write a column about Allagash, and I said to him, you know, asking me to write a social, write about what goes on in the community of Allagash is like asking Emily Dickinson to write a column for the Amherst Weekly. Not too connected.
Hi, this is Craig King. I just want to say
Oh
hi.
my God! Glasses, oh my gosh. Listen, this is something I was telling Bob Keys earlier. Northern Maine stick together like you wouldn't believe. Signing, and they'll say, I've never read any of your books and I hadn't heard about you before, but I see you're from Northern Maine. You know, can you imagine someone from Portland doing that? I haven't read any of your books, but I'm from Portland too, so I didn't. Garfield was a character. He encouraged me in very, very subtle ways. And when I was given the Distinguished Alumni Award from Fort Kent, this is the same university that expelled me. It became an AP story that the person they kicked out, they gave the Distinguished Alumni Award to. But I had gone back and made things good with him by then. But Garfield came to the banquet for the award, and he was so proud. I was kind of teary-eyed thinking about those days and him.
Hello. I read something curious many years ago and I can't recall, can't make any attribution. Anyway, it said everything that happened that was important in the life of a writer happened before they were 18 or something like that. You may have read that. And I'm wondering, you know, I wondered about it a lot. And yeah, I'm from Maine too, I'm from a small town. But anyway, I wonder what you thought about that. Is there some gravity there that somehow...
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny how people come up with these yardsticks, you know. Eudora Welty said, oh my gosh. What was that before 10, by the age of 10? Does anyone remember?
You write all your novels in the first 10 years.
Or everything you write about has happened to you by the time you're 10 years old. I mean, I'd be more willing to lean on Eudora Welty's side than 18. But I think she means the pure emotion of life and, you know, how things affect us so deeply. I don't know anything about that. I wanted to write a funny song called My Guardian Angel Won't Go to a Bar. So that wouldn't fit the 18 thing. I don't know. Do you agree with that? No.
It might have been earlier. I mean, I don't know.
Or it might have been later.
Yes.
You know, life starts at 60.
There's a question in the back.
Yes, thank you. Big fan. Aunt Cathie, any chance I can catch a ride back to Allagash with you later?
That's my great nephew. I mean, who else is here from Allagash? You have to go to Herald Valley Library first, which I'm going to be on Sunday. Otherwise, you don't know anybody there. Oh,
I was a trustee there.
it's like a high school reunion.
But I do have a question for you.
Yeah.
You've written under the pseudonym McKinnon. You mentioned earlier tonight.
You couldn't ask me this like 2 weeks?
Well,
no, it's okay.
But it's always been clear to me you have a strong affinity to your grandmother, Augusta McKinnon. And I was just wondering if you could talk about that a little bit and the nature of that.
Well, I think Chase no more so than my Thibodeau grandmother. I don't think there was... I knew my Thibodeau grandmother better, Grandma Pelletier, which is Thibodeau. I knew her better. I think I took the name because it was McKinnon and Grammy Thibodeau's name was Pelletier to get a new name. I don't know. I would have to go to my mother first, her daughter, you know, who was so influential in my life. My mother and I locked horns many times. Oh, what if I were your daughter? And you know something? Before my mother died, she said to me, it was what, maybe 2 weeks before she died, she said, do you remember that typewriter I bought you kids? And I said, yes, and I did. I still have the letter that my mother saved everything. My archives are at the University of New England here, and it's very rare, they tell me, to have so much. They call it, is it juvenilia? Something like that. Sounds a little risque there. Something like that. And it's quite rare. And my mother saved everything, my first papers, my first day of school. And so I did remember, because the letter is there now. I was 7 years old when I typed it. And I remember the other kids standing behind me wanting to kill me because they had to wait. I was first. And she said, I bought that typewriter because I wanted to be a writer. And I was shocked. Never heard that before, ever. So, and she told me a little story that she thought she might write about an old man who lingers next to this bush at the edge of a yard where he's walking past, and they're afraid that he might be going to do something to the children. And then they find out that there's a little bird's nest in there, and he's been watching it to make sure nobody hurts it. And I said, well, you want me to co-write that with you? And she said, well, okay. And then I started getting into, we got to have, this plot, we got to conflict, we got to have, she didn't want to do that. She wanted it to stay that sweet little Hallmarkian thing. And so we even argued over that before she died. Very quickly, I almost drowned when I was 4.5 years old, and I was 3/4 of a mile from the house swimming with my 10-year-old sister in pretty deep water. A man almost drowned trying to save me, and my uncle, who was a gang warden, pretty much saved us both. I was passed out by then. And when I came to on the shore, I saw my 12-year-old cousin looking down at me, and I thought, oh my God, there's an elephant, and I've only got on my panties. Now, I was 4.5. Where modesty is going to trump death any day of the week, especially being Ethel O'Leary's daughter. But until she died, about 2 weeks before she died, I gave up, but I bring it up. Why did you let me go? I was 4.5 years old, and I almost drowned, and like another person almost drowned, and she said, well, Cathie, you were so headstrong. I say, Mama, weren't you bigger? Weren't you bigger? And she'd say, well, if I had let you, if I had made you stay home, the minute your father got home, he'd let you go. And I said, not have lived a couple more hours. We have these conversations right now, but to find out that she wanted to be a writer, Chase, I don't know if I ever told you that, but that's why she bought the typewriter, and she never did it. So if any of you are in this audience tonight and you want to be writers, this is what I say to my students. Quit talking about it. I know people who've talked about that novel for 40 years. They're not going to write it. Writing has to be practiced daily. It has to be almost daily. It has to be a lot of time. You're not a ballerina overnight. And sadly, when you're about 30, you're no longer a ballerina. Writers keep writing, Herman Wouk is, what, 102 now, and he published a book. When was his last book? He's like 100? He's like on book tour. So writers aren't ballerinas or baseball players. You got to keep at it. So if you're thinking of writing, even if it's your life story for your family. I've taught memoir workshops for people that I don't care if they want to be writers or not. I just want them to get their story down with their family. Do it now. Ethel didn't do it. She didn't do it. And we didn't co-write.
That's great advice. One more question. One more question, and I think we'll wrap this up.
I did see her. Oh, her face. Oh, it's me.
I'm terrified of who next is going to
Hi, Cathie. I am actually not from Allagash, although someday I will go up there with Dorothy. But mine's actually about your book. My book club, which I've been going to for, well, we're just entering our 20th year. We read you in July of 2014. We read The Funeral Maker. And we very much enjoyed it. Thought it was quite a hoot. I'm wondering, the scene where they were driving from Portland up to Allagash, did that really happen?
Oh no.
Oh, it's so real.
You know what's funny is that almost nothing I've written has happened. And for some reason, because that's what a writer does. You invent. My imagination, I'd like to think, is more fertile than needing to take things from people. But for some reason, when my first novel came out, I started getting accused by people in Maine. You know where I got my worst reviews? In Maine. Nashville was calling me Nashville's own and praising me. Now that says something, though, doesn't it? It says something. But it started that I was writing about the people from Allagash. Well, strangely, you know, if you take a novel and you're reading it tonight, and it's written by a writer from Washington State or Oregon, you don't start saying, is this true? I wonder, did this happen? Is there someone in it? You just read it, don't you? So, yes, it's so real, but people forget that I'm from Allagash. It's just like I said about the Vietnam soldier, that I had to become him. I had to step into his skin and make it my own. It's the same thing with these characters, because I grew up in Allagash. I was born and raised. My ancestors founded the town. So I know how people can talk and think. And by the way, it's pretty hard to find smarter people than a lot of the people I grew up with in Allagash. And that's a high level of intelligence, because I mean, they're funny. They're Oscar Wilde funny. So you have to be funny or you leave town, pretty much. So no, it didn't, but I love the way people love that scene. And when I wrote the screenplay, oh, I hope it's still going to be a movie. It's like 21 years in the making. I really like writing screenplays because it's a different picture altogether. You know, the camera is there for you. In a book, you have to be the production designer. You got to be the dialogue coach. You got to be the costume designer. You have to do it all in a novel because you're the only one. But a camera does that, and all these people do all that, and so you have a different kind of freedom, and I really love it. And Donald Sutherland has optioned one of my original screenplays, but he gets much older, I'm going to have to change it. It's had it like about 8 years. It's a very frustrating business. I was telling Bob that I'm very proud of those 2 television films because I know how hard it is to get a film made. You know, you have some amazing authors in Maine who've been lucky like that. You know, Bridget Russo is a perfect example. Dear friend, I don't know Lily, but hasn't her book been made into a film?
No.
No, it's The Orphan Train. Laura?
Christina.
I'm naming names anyway. It's good. It's good to mention writers. I'm wrong. But it's a complicated process, and you have to change a novel to make it film. You just have to. If you write, you understand that it's necessary. You try to keep it as true as you can. But, oh, by the way, I wrote the screenplay for The Funeral Makers. I don't know if I'll end up being a screenplay writer or a co-writer if it does get made by Doug Lyman, who's such a hot director now that he, I hope he comes back to it. But he called me one day and said, Cathie, have you read The Funeral Makers? I had changed so much of my own novel. I knew the characters, and I knew what they would do in new situations, so I felt like I had a right to do that. So I changed deaths, I changed everything. And he called and said, have you read The Funeral Makers? He wanted me to stick to the book. Isn't that amazing? Flip-flop for you.
Great. Cathie, thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure.
Appreciate it. Everybody.